Hi, everybody. Welcome to the Technology Evangelist podcast. I'm Dr. John Fluke, Technology Evangelist, and I'm really grateful to Medidenta for sponsoring our work here. Today, I've got a guest that a lot of you may not know about, but I think after today, you're going to know a lot about him. His name is Kim Solomon, and he is the Director of Business Development at Pac-Dent. And Pac-Dent makes tons of great resins and tons of great other kind of products. And we're going to talk really about what they do and Kim's journey, because I love origin stories, and his origin story is a good one. So Kim, thank you for joining me today.
Thank you, John, for having me. It's a pleasure to be here and be able to share stories and dental geeking, as I used to call it, when you all get together and talk about cool things that are happening in the industry.
No, absolutely. And I kind of have the double benefit of I'm kind of a hardware geek and a materials geek. So this is going to be great for me. Kim, I always start off with an origin story, and kind of like I said when we were just first talking a second ago, that your origin story is a good one because you bring some amazing experience to what you're doing as the Director of Business Development. So, get in the Wayback Machine. Feel free to wind it back as far as you want to and tell us, how did you get to where you are today?
Well, thank you, John. It has been an interesting journey. I actually started in 1982. Um, And I had the privilege of meeting one of the top dental technicians at that time. In a sidebar, we actually were playing intramural rugby together. And
Oh my gosh, you
and
were a diehard.
and during one of the breaks at one of the games, we were talking, just chit-chatting back and forth. And
Yeah.
I just said, "What do you do for a living?" He said, "I'm a dental technician." I said, "That's pretty cool. I'd love to check that out." So I went by the lab, spent a few hours with him, and just kind of geeking out on stuff, and was really just amazed at how the process was and all of the different protocols that went into place to actually take a tooth from an impression all the way through to a finished product and do it within about 5 to 7 days. So I was sold. And he said, "Well, we'll get you started on the job training." And I started in the plaster room and learned how to pour models and advanced pretty quickly, into other facets. Back then, we did all the lost wax casting technique.
Right.
So everything was waxed and then cast and then, of course, finished. I actually started at the very end of the era where gold was still quite prominent, before the pricing started to accelerate. And then the shift went into, base metals, but also into palladium base metals as well to keep it in the noble and the high noble range for those doctors that wanted those. So it was a big transition period, and we were looking to work with different alloys. And of course, that was the challenges working with different ceramics
Right.
because the coefficients were different, and also the process was a little different within the lab investments and times. So not to get too deep in the rabbit hole here, but it opened up the window of what began to accelerate in the dental technology space. And I think that working with someone in a small laboratory environment where I got to experience the cutting edge products, because he did a little bit of lecturing on the side,
Mhm.
and he also wanted to create his own educational programs. So this is where I began to dabble in the marketing sales aspect of it. We put together some educational programs. We were teaching other technicians on how to do one bake technique, which was, of course, watered down from Tanaka,
Right.
one of the original go-to guys in the industry that was teaching ceramics back then. And it became quite popular because it was another time asset to save time and money, but also to create, what they called the dry powder technique buildup. And this is back when they would use 10, 12, 15 different powders in a tooth buildup. Really
Right.
customized, shades were customized. It was a different era versus today. So that's where I cut my teeth, and I worked with him for about 8 years. We had a friendly parting, and I stepped and actually went in private to a private practice with another dentist and worked in his office for about another year and a half. Uh, I actually got the bug to do something different. I had been in the dental tech space performing in the daily duties for almost 10 years, and decided that I wanted to experience working in the corporate life because I had these salesmen calling me all the time and they had these great products and they seemed to have, an inside track on what was
Right.
happening. And they also got to go to conventions and interact with a lot more people than you would at the dental lab sometimes.
Yeah.
So got an opportunity to join Williams Gold as a salesman way back in the day before they became Ivoclar. So that started my path. And from there, it springboarded to 7 different companies. 4 of them were Fortune 500 companies. I spent some time at Generic Pentron, Noble Biocare, BioHorizons, Panthera Dental, and now working with Pac-Dent. And through that journey, along that timeline, were the transition from materials, where we saw sculpture fiber core, we saw the first
Right.
resins appear, we saw aluminum dioxide, we saw zirconia. All these things began to evolve. And of course, the chase was to have all ceramic full units, posterior bridges that could withstand functioning in the mouth, for a longer period of time than initially they started out to be.
Yeah. And that was a real trick back in the day.
It was. It was being part of the InSeram first
Right.
with
Yeah.
Vita. It first came about just to get a 3 unit bridge to work was quite a challenge, but we were able to succeed at that. So now where we are today is just almost light years. I feel like some parts have been the Jetsons, but it's took us 35 plus years to get here.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's amazing to me how much it's changed just in, you know, I don't know for sure um on the base level of knowledge on how they're training young dentists today as far as crown and bridge. Um, but I grew up in the lost wax world and having to do investments and burnouts and wax patterns and all that kind of stuff. And I thought it was really interesting. So real quick, do you know Ayush at Accurata by chance?
I do.
Okay. So he and I spoke, and I thought it was so interesting because I asked him, give me your origin story. And he talked about that he graduated from college with a degree in additive manufacturing. And I was just like, I mean, we go from this thing of having to build everything by hand, and then in a fairly short amount of time there's college degrees basically in 3D printing. And I asked him, okay, so once you got it, what did you do? And he said, I went into the jewelry business.
Yes.
And it was just like, oh my gosh, like the great circle of life, because the whole thing of, when I graduated dental school, when I started a family, I actually took all the little nuggets and buttons of gold that I had left from my dental school career, and my lab tech melted them down and created 3 charms for my wife for our 3 children, and I put them on a necklace. But anyway, it was just kind of funny of how jewelry has come along on the journey with us into this
Hmm.
whole thing of digital creation, and yet the principles are still the same. And so I get back to the students of, I've got this huge appreciation for what it takes to actually make a crown. And I don't know if everybody has that same, knowledge base anymore. And I think if you don't have that knowledge base, if you're watching this, you have that knowledge base, you should go back and, watch some YouTube videos or something on how Kim used to do it back in the day, because I think it gives you a much greater appreciation for how far it's come um, into
It,
today's world. And so now with Pac-Dent, tell me what you're doing at Pac-Dent.
what I'm doing with Pactin is I'm assisting them in the business development on the rodent line. And I have to
Okay.
confess that I'm a pretty new student into the 3D resin printing world. Been around it, understood it, always looked at it as a part of the lab business, especially, from the infancy stage when it was about models and then
Right.
bites and then, all the things, the ancillary products that were kicked in, but really built the foundation from which the digital industry has jumped off of and kickstarted it. But for me, I guess the real aha moment was when I saw what they were doing in the implant space and how it was transitioning into a product that would allow a doctor to use guided surgery, place implants, and then be able to print a high
Right.
functioning temporary, we call them uh, not necessarily temporaries now. But they're
Right.
not actually referred to as definitive either because there's a window in between how long they last, depending on the product. We won't go down that rabbit hole either yet. So I think that what amazed me was the workflow, but also being able to the time transition that the patient actually had to sit in the chair. Another little
Hmm.
nugget from my past, I actually was the one of the pilot teams that kicked off the all-on-4 revolution with Noble Biocare.
Oh, outstanding.
So I was the Procera technical manager, which headed up all of the restorative components in which the laboratory would do. But the laboratory learned all the chairside application because they had to do transitional denture for the
Right.
patient. So there were many hours spent in watching surgeries and then being there post-surgery to go through that process. And what was unique, as we all know, when you start out in a new application in a system, the time it expands. And so what you think is
Right.
going to take 2 hours can take four because there's things that
Right.
happen that you don't see coming. And are you prepared? I can remember some of the early mentors and technicians that were involved in this would create 5 to 7 different application patterns so that if one didn't fit, they could fall back to another. And so the preparation
Bingo.
time and being ready was really intense. But the ones that were good at it learned quickly. And
Hmm.
there's some of them still around today. They're pivotal in positions and companies, and they're helping now this new generation of resin and printing and acceleration of the timeline to take place, which means as doctors begin to engage in this, it's actually better patient care because you're not putting them through as
Absolutely.
much trauma and time space. You're giving them a much better, what I call temporary solution that they can go
Right.
home with and function. And the beauty of it is, if it fails, we can print you another one.
Bingo. Yeah. And it's funny. I'm a Midwest Catholic boy. So I refer to these as purgatory restorations because I tell my patients, they're not temporary. They're certainly not temporary. I'm not sure they're permanent. They're kind of in this nebulous world, between the two. And it's funny because I get that. Um, but yeah, the whole piece of that, of having the guided surgery, being able to know, exactly where that implant is going to go, know the exact bone density, know the exact angle, and then create everything to that. I mean, I've done cases in my career where, we need and it's funny because I'm one of the few people that calls them transitional removable partials. Most people call them flippers. But you've had these cases where it's like I've sent it to the lab and I'm like, okay, I need you to put that tooth right down so we get the good tissue form to it and the good
Yes,
emergence angle and everything like that. And the skill that a lab tech has to be able to do that, to understand that when that patient isn't in front of them, they're just, in the old days, looking at an impression and then a model and being able to figure that out
yep,
on, how is the tissue going to flare and, what's the final tissue shape going to look like when you're dealing with a rock solid, piece of stone and then be able to process all that. The skill involved in that is amazing. And now, whether the doctor's doing it themselves or whether they're sending it out and having somebody create the file and then sending it back, being able to draw and go, you know what, no, I don't like that, let's just change that a little bit, and then getting exactly what you designed is it's so much more efficient, it's so much better for the patients. And
true.
like you said, if they lose it, if it breaks, if the old thing of the dog ate it, which still stuns me, how many appliances get consumed by pets. But it's a matter of press a button, and you don't even have to see anybody in the office other than the front desk. We'll put it in a case, it'll be sitting up front. You can pick it up, snap it in, and it's identical, to what Fluffy just ate last night while you slept or whatever it is. And
Yes,
the planning of that is incredible. The other thing that I would tell doctors, and I thought it was great that you brought this up, is first time you do anything, it rarely goes according to plan.
exactly.
And one of the things that I always do is when we start something new, especially something like this, I always bake in extra time. I always say, okay, if a crown is going to take me, a 90-minute appointment block me rather than 1.5 hours, block me 2. Give me a chance, because one of the things that I think happens with doctors, and you probably saw it because you worked in a dental office too, was that, not only do we have to be good at what we do, but doctors kind of, for lack of a better description, we're on stage, we perform. And the patient's awake, the patient can sense your stress level. And if you've been doing crowns for 15 years and you've got a system that works, and then you bring in a new system and suddenly you struggle, the first thing that people do is forget this, I'll go back to the old way, because that's the comfort level. I know I can do this, bang, bang, bang. And then they either lose confidence in the new thing, or they panic and they're like, what am I going to do? I can't keep doing it this way because, I look inept, and the patients wonder what's going on. And I've always leveled with the patients. I've always said, look, we're going to schedule a lot more time for this. And that's because, like, I've never done this before, or I've done it on the bench, but I haven't done it in the mouth. And I want to make sure that we got the time, because it's the time crunch in the appointment that creates the stress usually.
Exactly. Exactly.
Yeah. And so building in that time is critical. And then once you get your feet under you, then you're right back to your standard scheduling, or oftentimes less time, but you
Right.
just got to give yourself a chance to fail.
Uh, And I think that's an excellent point, that you're giving yourself that permission to have that leniency of some extra time to actually learn it, get confident and competent in being
Mm-hmm.
able to deliver. And it's the human part of newness, I think, that draws us
Yep.
in, because we're sold it's new technology, it's faster, it's better, it's easier, but we all know that there's a learning curve,
Yes.
and everyone goes through it differently. So I think using that and sort of proclaiming that as you move into these new technologies, you're going to be a lot more forgiving and you'll get your feet under you a lot faster. We had a saying back in the day where we'd say, well, when it's slow, it's usually fast. Because
Yeah.
once you catch it when it's slow, then you're going to accelerate quicker and understand it. It's
Yeah.
even harder today because you're bouncing in between so many different softwares and applications and processes. And to understand, like you were mentioning, that you did the gold work and all. I think every dental technician has played around some gold work for earrings or something along the way. It's just
Sure.
part of the animal that we were in creative side. But what really came down to being good at your trade back then was being able to make things fit exceptionally, especially long span crown and bridge cases.
Yep.
And to develop a technique that you could actually wax an 8, 10, 12 unit case and be able to pull it off, cast it, and not have to cut it and solder it.
Yeah.
That
That,
that
you know, one of the things I want to say too for the younger doctors that are watching this is, if you've got a good lab, I mean, free plug for my guy, Technical Crown and Bridge in Lee Summit, Missouri. Joe Forte owns it, and it's a small lab. I'm not even sure if he has 10 folks working for him, but
yeah,
he and I are the same age. We've worked together almost my entire career. So he knows how I think, I know how he thinks. But the piece of advice I give to doctors is, if you've got a good lab and you've got to, number one, build a relationship with the lab. The
yep,
other thing is, avail yourself of the knowledge that those folks have, because they work with lots of doctors, they work with lots of cases. And multiple times in my career, I pick up the phone and call Joe, and he may not even have the case yet. I may be getting ready to prep something. And I'm like, here's what I'm thinking of doing.
yes,
What do you think? And,
yes.
I've had him say things to me like, you know what? I've seen that done 20 times in the last year. One of them worked.
There you go.
And I'm like, okay, if he's got that, I'm not going to do 20 of them. I'm going to do one, and my first. So how am I going to learn, what's right and what's wrong? And the lab industry has this crazy amount of knowledge, because you deal with so many different materials and so many different people. Ask your lab tech if you've got a question, because chances are they've got the answer. And I love to quote my grandfather because he was a bit of a philosopher. He used to always say, experience is what you get 5 seconds after you needed it in the first place. And when you're in front of a patient, basically I always say you only learn from failure. And that's kind of dovetails back with that 5 second thing. So if you've got a way to avail yourself of the experience of other people, man, grab onto that and hold it for all it's worth. Have a
Absolutely.
great communication system with your lab techs because I
Absolutely.
think that's critical to success.
It is, and it's also kind of a dying art part of the business now.
Yes.
And it's just because, like you said, your technician's similar to your age, and that's pretty much represents across the industry.
Right.
In other situations where sons are now taking over for dads, but there's just been this privatizing of the lab industry, and of course, we all know the P&E folks have gotten a hold of it, and they're
Right.
purchasing up labs just like everything else. But that's just
Just like they are
nature of the
dental
beast.
offices. Yeah.
And yeah, that's the same thing that's
Yeah.
going on. So it even becomes even more valuable if you find that lab and that person that can help you. I like to refer to another little sidebar story. When I worked at Panther Dental, my training at Noble Biocare really transformed me into implant-borne prosthetics, mainly titanium substructures, things that
Okay.
with people who had no teeth are now going back with implants to have teeth and the functions that go around that. And what I came to with Panther Dental, just so you know, they were actually the software company that Nobel purchased when they went into ProSeries implant bars.
Okay.
So
I didn't know that. That's a great,
yeah,
great little piece of industry trivia.
it was called BioCAD, and they had a short run with another company. I won't mention that company right now, but Nobel invested
Fair.
in them and became a cornerstone of the product that would then become the all-on-4 restorative solution. So what I learned through that transition, of course, is that there's no case that can't be resolved as long as you have enough options. And one of the things that I would actually do at Panthera, a doctor would call and he'd say, I have 6 different implants in the arch. Well, that's great. They must have found those all in the back drawer and decided to put them all in. So
Right.
that means you're going to have a challenge. I would say, do you have any photos? Text me the photos and give me a few minutes and I'm going to come back with good, better, best. And then my final question was, what's the budget?
Yeah. Yeah.
What's the expectations here? Because I'm not going to give you a solution that's going to cost thousands of dollars when the patient can only afford hundreds.
Yes.
I'm just being upfront about it because sure, we have a couple solutions that are outstanding. However, they are going to be high dollar solutions.
Right.
So that would come back and it would be interesting to see exactly the challenge that was presented. The one thing that really kept me really engaged in that sector of the industry was the fact that Nobel Biocare, let's see, they were at 25 years now with All on 4. And then all the companies that started doing All on 4. So there are millions and millions of implants that have been placed
Oh, yeah.
successfully and are still viable out there with patients today. It's usually the restorative work that ends up failing. And so they'll show up again at a doctor's office with their prosthetics in hand saying, this broke. Can you
Right.
make another one for me? And then it goes into what implant system we're using. What's the titanium structure you have? What shape, form, function does it do? But I'm going to dial this back into where the story was going, in that there is a solution that can be met that can give that patient back the dentition, the chewing ability that they were accustomed to, and the expectation, of what the budget is going to reflect it. So whenever I get into these types of conversations, not only with colleagues, but also, fellow competitive companies, because we all look at
Right.
the solutions, I always dial it back into what are the needs of the patient and what are we trying to accomplish today so they can then function for tomorrow.
Right.
And it's a simplistic way, but also to have confidence in your support systems within the companies you work for. That's the really
Yeah.
strengths you stand on.
You
So
don't want to be hanging out in the wind. You really,
no,
really don't.
no, you don't. So I'll flash forward now and back to Pac-Dent. So what is happening with the 3D revolution is phenomenal right now. Not only in the material advancements, but the printing speeds, the times, the
Yes.
equipment that's beginning to come out, and the cost factors are actually coming down a little bit because technology is driving that. And I think we're going to see another big jump in about 12 to 18 months due to AI's um,
Yeah.
injection into just
Right.
about every phase, into every phase. So I've had conversations in the past few months with a few individuals and also companies that are looking at future products that are going to come to fruition. And we're going to shift back into a little bit of that learning curve that you spoke about earlier,
Right.
because all of these will be new. And what's going to be new is they're going to start connecting all these systems in sequence. So no longer will you have a case that will come in as a digital file that you have to rename it and place it and move it and then do design and move it over here and print it and move it over there. These systems are going to just streamline it all the way through from beginning to end. And they're going to also capture the information and then also send emails or correspondence back to all the key people in the chain. So it's going to really enhance what we're doing without having to have multiple, I don't want to say multiple people, but actually multiple stops along the way that you
Yeah.
may have to manually go in and do this.
Right. Well, I've I've been I've been in dentistry long enough that I started with paper.
Mhm.
And I saw, it's funny. I'm so grateful to be born when I was born, because I've got this perspective on the entire, spectrum of what happened, and what I've seen. And if you've ever read anything I've written about this a few times, but in the 90s, we started off with cameras and radiography, and those were cart-based systems that we would wheel into the patient and use. And then in the late 90s, the desktop world, all of the cameras and the radiography systems, they had their own laptops, but those laptops were stupid expensive.
Yes.
And then we got to a point in the 90s where suddenly the processor speed wasn't crazy expensive anymore. And the operatory computer came in. And suddenly those standalone systems were like what I like to say is spokes on a hub, and the hub was that operatory computer, and everything plugged into it. It centralized it. And we went along like that for a while. And then in the late aughts, 2006 to 2009,
Yes.
we saw 3D come in. And, we CEREC and E4D had been around for a while, but once again, those were standalones. And then we started to see things like the iTero and 3Shape, and then cone beam came along, and it kind of, well, I shouldn't say it did, it splintered. So what happened was we had the operatory computer that would connect to things, but then we also had all these other systems that didn't.
Yes.
And so I think what we went through like an innovation phase, and then we went through an integration phase where it all connected to
Yes.
the computer. Then we've gone through, for like the last probably 15 years, another innovation phase. And what we're about to see is what I'm calling integration 2.0, where suddenly one computer somewhere in your office is going to take all of that information and do what you said. I've been saying for probably a decade that at some point we are going to see what I've called the continually updating 3D patient,
Hmm.
where you'll take a cone beam as just part of your new patient intake. And then as part of that intake, again, you'll do an intraoral scan. And in the background, with no intervention on your part, it's going to merge the scan into the cone beam.
Yes.
And now you've got this exact representation. And every time you do a crown prep or an extraction or whatever, you scan them again. And suddenly you've got this, 3D thing of exactly how they look like today. And with the motion detection and things, you can now do articulation all digitally. There's systems out there that the patient can open and close and roll a ball around in their mouth, and it tracks all of that. And what I didn't think about when I was talking about this continually updating 3D patient was, what is it going to take to do that? And that was
Yeah.
AI.
Yeah.
And now that AI is coming so big into the industry, that's the Rosetta Stone of all of this, of being able to put all of this together, and then just being able to look at a screen and say, yeah, that looks good.
Absolutely.
I want to do a crown, or I want to do an all-on-4, and the system's going to say, okay, well, we've analyzed the cone beam. Here's the place for the best bone density. Here's the ideal angles. What do you think of that? Doctor doesn't like it, you move it. But if you like it, you say, next, and it's going to say, okay, here's your proposed surgical guide.
Yes.
And
Yes.
it's going to just rock things. I mean, there's no doubt about it. And it's going to
100%.
change things. Like you said, there's going to be a learning curve, but there's going to be a phenomenal amount of change in the next 5 years.
I totally agree with you, John. I think that even though we've seen great technology advancements, we're just on the cusp of really seeing the next big jump. And it's
Mhm.
here. The the amazement that I have with all this taking place is not only how it's transitioning, again, the clinic
Right.
and what's happening there, but also the back end support and the technical support that's beginning to fold into it. As you're aware, a lot of dentists are purchasing equipment, hardware, software, beginning to do some of these the fulfillment products in their office, and it seems to be a new trend, and we're
Mhm.
embracing it to some degree, but we're also embracing what I call the relationship-based avenue as well, so that you constantly want to stay in touch with your lab and you're working on different solutions. And there may be a point to where that solution is not profitable for the lab to do anymore.
Right. And I think the communication part, like I said, that's critical. It
It
really truly is.
100%. But it's really going to be in the ecosystem workflows. And once you start establishing those, then you're really going to start to get a leg up. And I'll switch gears just a little bit. I was working with a colleague on a project in which we're trying to dial in the digital denture workflow.
Right.
And it's challenging
Hmm.
depending on what systems you're using, and I won't go into
Right.
the whole chronology behind it, but where you begin to find the nuances and the time saving is actually to help get the percentages of success bar up the scale.
Yep. Yes.
And it's taken a lot of trial and error. You hear different doctors reporting different processes, different successes
Right.
with different materials. What I feel it's beginning to boil down to is number one, we're going back to number of appointments. We're going back to patient expectations.
Right.
And so now we're entering that phase of, are digital dentures going to be accepted as the norm?
Right.
In other words, will we get away from the old analog denture pressurized,
Right.
excuse me, done with the IvoCap system, which have
Yes.
longevity. However, the market is shifting. And I'll branch into this just quickly, and I don't want to again take us down a deep rabbit hole, because
Right.
the things that I'm hearing though as we're moving into these spaces, patients presenting today. Well, number one, we all know what the economy situation is that's going on right now, and
Right.
everyone is seeing a little bit of a downturn, also some upturns, but we're also looking at ways that how we can be innovative and also
Right.
meet patient demands. So this conversation came up with some colleagues a few days ago about, well, what are you doing to address that? And I think printed 3D printed resin products are allowing us to enter into that space and to be able to deliver a point of sale product now that can meet some expectations in between that purgatory level you were talking about
Yeah.
before.
Right. Right.
However, the patient leaves with a aesthetic functioning product. And the shift is on. And I'm watching younger dentists that are coming in, and they're trying to find, where's the leverage point now in my
Right.
practice? How is technology giving me that? All the way from learning how to design on 3Shape and exocad. I mean,
Hmm.
what percentage of dentists were doing that 10 years ago? Very
Yeah.
few. It's,
Very.
it's the same number of percentage of dentists learned how to use Photoshop back
Right.
20 years ago.
Yeah.
So, just to get color fixation and be able to print pictures that look like teeth. So as we're advancing, this is opening up a door, and it hovers in between insurance and fee for service.
Right.
But every patient is in one of those two positions when they show
Hmm.
up. When they show up in your practice, and usually they're there because something's broke, they're in pain, they're looking for a solution.
Right.
So I think the challenge that we're going to see that's going to continually emerge is, how do we meet those needs at price points that can be accepted, but also work within the system because of savings of time and also deliverables that can be reproduced at very low cost. Because you and I both know the actual cost around printing something is 10 to 15% maybe of,
Yeah.
of the actual deliverable cost.
Right.
And never before have we seen those types of profit margins that can be realized
No,
in our industry on both sides.
yeah. I mean, you think about, lab fee for a crown, probably 60 to 120.
Yes.
And I've seen some studies on, now I know there's hardware and everything else, but the resin piece of it, it's like $3.50.
Yeah.
And yeah, I mean, that's incredible. And the other thing that I think is interesting is I don't know if it's because dentists tend to be skeptics, or whether it's the performance anxiety of, doing new things in front of people for the first time. But I'm amazed at how much further along the lab industry is in this digital journey than most dental offices. Most labs, I mean, we've got a local lab in the Kansas City area that will actually, they've gone, so in Missouri where I practice, I live in Kansas, I practice in Missouri, but
Mhm.
in Missouri you can have expanded functions dental assistants. And this lab actually took some of their techs and got them certified as expanded functions assistants.
Yes.
And you can call them up and say, I've got a full arch, upper and lower, full denture case. And they will actually send the tech to the office, use your scanner, scan the patient. And, the dentist has to obviously check off on it and sign off on it, all those things, but they're legally, perfectly within bounds of doing this. And then, they just send the files to their lab and then deal with them. I mean, the simplicity of it is so easy, but the skill level that these lab techs have, not only with a patient, but the tools they have at their disposal in the lab. I think the lab is probably 2 or 3 times, most labs, further along with this than doctors are. And
They've
I don't think, if you've got a local lab that you deal with, I don't think it's a bad idea at all to call them up and say, hey, can I come look around and just see what they're doing? Because that may then give the doctor the confidence to say, whoa, this is amazing. I can do a lot of this myself, or I can offer these services, and maybe either, if you're struggling making money, increase my profitability. Or if you're successful, it may allow you to say, those patients that can't afford what I do, I can afford to, donate, or, cut the fees for some of these folks because the costs are so low. So I think there's a great benefit across the board. But it just amazes me how the labs have embraced this so much more than the doctors have at this point.
I agree with you, John. I think they've had to. I think they've had to look for new solutions and to be able to provide services that are now being presented into their clients and their future clients' practices.
Mhm.
And when you take that to what I personally call this the hybrid position within the operatory, the clinic.
Right.
The person that has the technical training, a little bit of the equipment training, understands enough to be able to get the product to A to Z, and whether that's
Mhm.
printing a single crown, a flipper, or a bleaching tray, or one of these ancillary products, before moving into dentures and all on X type of printing within the
Right.
operatory. They're on a learning curve. So as you were saying, this has been embraced, in your part of the region in the world. There's now um, certification that allows someone to come in with and working within the system. And
Right.
I'm not sure how far that spread out to the 50 states. I would like to find out what that really looks like, because that's an
I would
interesting
too, because I
point.
don't know either.
Yeah. So where I'm going with this is that the transition that's happening also kind of dovetails into what's happening with the exit of technicians leaving the industry or not coming in because there's no schools. I mean, you go into this whole dilemma. Everyone says we can't find techs, that it's not there. Well,
Right.
we've got to find a generation that's excited to do this kind of work based on not only computer savvy, but also being able to embrace and understand dental technology savvy.
Mhm.
And I think they're there. I think they're where they're waiting to be found. And it's also going to open a whole new segment that will be this transitional partner that takes place to not only help the practice succeed and be more profitable, but and offer more solutions based
Right.
on what the practice needs are, versus then just what, the cookie cutter selections that we see sometimes off
Yeah.
of a menu.
Yeah.
And
Well, Go ahead. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No, that's really kind of where I was going with it. And so my conversation, case in point, doctor wants to get a new iOS scanner.
Right.
First thing you want to ask him, well, what are you going to use it for? How many different channels are you actually going to use this new piece of equipment for? Because you're just getting it to do sleep appliances, as example.
Right.
That's where you want to go. Okay, that's a good channel to have. However, are you going to practice dentistry 2 days of the week or in the sleep dentistry the other 2 days of the week?
Right.
What's your plan, Doc? And that's when you begin to unravel a little bit of where the doctor sees his vision, why he's putting this piece of equipment in, why he wants to move forward. It's the same thing when they ask about a printer. I want to put a printer and an ecosystem in my operatory. And there's a company that's been very successful with that, and they've made a good impact so far. I won't say their name because they're a competitor,
Sure.
but they're doing something different, and different sometimes, which is disruptive, but also it creates change. And I think
Yes.
other companies are seeing how to follow it. However, it's not just sell them equipment and materials. It's got to be an end-to-end solution. So this is the challenge that I see every company running into. And not to forego saying having educational centers is the way of the world, but we're still
Right.
coming back to that. And Medidenta does a great job with that. Little plug to you guys. Um,
Thank you.
it helping match that up so that as the doctor moves into these new phases, he can accelerate his confidence and competence. Therefore, all of those products that they're purchasing now begin to work and they begin to
Right.
slide into the everyday function of the practice. And so
Right.
now you have all of those selections to offer the patient.
My dad uh, was not in healthcare. Well, he was a corpsman in the Navy, but for a couple of years. But he owned a printing company. But one of the things that he taught me, and I thought this was it's kind of funny, but it is kind of true too, is he said, I love turnkey systems. I love buying something from a company that, does it all, because then if I have a problem, I only have one person I have to yell at. And I always thought it was funny, but it is kind of true. But and I guess the yelling part is the dark side, but the light side is that you also have a partner.
Yes.
And that partner, one of the things I think that's interesting about things like mills and printers is that, yes, the company that sells the hardware does make money on that. I mean, that's just the way of the world. But really, what those companies really make their money on is the consumables,
Yes.
the resins and that sort of thing. So
Yes.
it behooves them to make sure you're successful, because if they sell you something and you don't like it, two things. Number one, you won't use it. And so they're not going to sell you anything else. And the other thing about the dental industry, especially now with as connected as we all are, somebody sneezes in Miami and a doctor gets a cold in LA the next day. You know,
Yes.
good news travels fast, bad news travels faster. So
Absolutely.
it's imperative for these companies to come to market with good solutions, team with the doctors, create an entire network of success, and then everybody's happy. So, when a doctor's making a choice on who to go with, um, two things. I like turnkey.
Hmm.
And the other thing is I like to tinker. So I like turnkey systems that are open, because if somebody comes out with a Titan and I want to try it, I don't want to call my printer vendor and say, hey, there's this new material, you don't make it, and like, oh, you can't use that,
Right.
you have to use ours.
Correct.
Part of the problem with that is I don't like to be limited in my choices. But the other thing is, on a closed system, for me, it's like, where's your pressure to innovate? If you
Hmm.
have a white resin that can make teeth, and you're selling it, why should I improve it? I don't have a reason to improve it. I'm selling boatloads of this already. But I love the fact of having those choices, because then if somebody else comes along with something like Titan, I can say, I want to try that. I want to, experiment with it. I want to bench it. And if I like it, then I can use it. I don't want to be locked into, well, you bought the car that has the hand crank to start it, and that's your only choice, when everybody else is going out and pushing a button on the dash and, tearing off into the wilderness.
Yeah,
I like the choices of the concept of the whole team thing. And I think that's a cool thing that I'll throw it back to Pac-Dent that Pac-Dent is doing, is working on, a solution for doctors, not
absolutely.
just a sale.
Absolutely. And recently with the acquisition of Accurata,
Mhm.
joining us now, which will now get us into the printing and processing and curing phases. It's going to open the door even further for those open systems because now we're going to be able to experiment with what the next generation of equipment looks like and works and feels and how does it actually fit into the everyday workflow that's being demanded. But leaving it open, that does allow you to try different products and not as long as they're validated on your machine, that's all you need to know.
Right.
And at Pac-Den, I believe we have over 40 to 45 different printers we're validated on. So that does leave the door open to for a lot of different solutions that if you're already there. And I think that as a manufacturer, you're actually doing yourself a favor because I have yet to walk into an office that is standardized with one type of product or equipment, meaning you'll find two different printers or three different ISOs, not to mention whatever's sitting in the closet that they're not using because they don't like it.
Right.
That happens. But
It
being
does
able
have.
to, it does happen. But being able to have that conversation, it again, it opens up the communication about what do you want this product to do and how do you want it to help grow a certain sector of your practice. So if you're not coming at it, and this is just my own personal take on it, you may have other points you want to bring in here, but if you're not evaluating things on the profitability and the growth that it can help bring you, meaning you now offer Kimwell for more services and more focused printed services that or others aren't actually doing it. And sorry, I had a few things running through my head at the same time. I want to make sure I
That's
said this
okay.
correctly.
That's the world I live in, Kim.
That you can get the we just call it wrapped around the axle real quick and divest yourself into way too much thinking on which way to go. I
Right.
think the clarity comes into when a system says this product will do XYZ for you in these systems that it's validated in, you make the choice.
Right.
Then it can be a cost comparison. It can be, does this work for me? And the sampling and trial stress is gone at that point.
Mhm.
You know,
Well,
if you're
and
in,
one of the things that I'm big on along those lines is I'm a like a list maker and an outline maker. So if I am going to bring something new into the office, I really try and think about it before I make the jump. The
yeah,
other thing that I think is great for doctors to do is um, if I'm going to bring in something that's going to really change the flow or change the scheduling, when I when I'm kicking it around before I make the final decision, I actually have a staff meeting. We bring in lunch. Oftentimes, I will tell
smart.
people ahead of time, I'm thinking of bringing in, a 3D printer.
Hmm.
And I'll talk to the admin people, I'll talk to the hygienists and the dental assistants and, talk to the other doctors. And then we sit down and sometimes I'll even ask them, like, make a list of you think are the good things about this and the bad things about this. And we kick it around. And
Hmm.
what I've found is a couple of things. Number one, having buy-in or having people
Huge.
say, well, I don't know that this is going to work because, and then you can say, well, did you think about this, for instance? I'll go back to the early days of digital charting. When I jumped to that, I had a team meeting and one of the hygienists was like, well, I don't know that I've got the time to sit and type every number into the computer. And so we're going to run behind. This is going to create problems. And the dental assistants all, what when we're done setting up rooms, we often have time, like 10 minutes for a cup of coffee or something. So, one of us can just run down there and grab the keyboard, and type the numbers in for you. And that hygienist's, anxiety about having to make this move was suddenly like, oh, well, yeah, then that makes it easy. So when you bring something in and everybody is like, yes, we should do this, you don't get that pushback of, I told you this was a bad idea, or you never asked me if I wanted to do this.
Right.
And
No,
then the other thing, but things, the creative things like 3D printing and milling, um, ever since COVID, dental offices, as you know, have had a horrible time with staff turnover,
yes.
finding good,
Yes.
and expanding the role of what your people can do, giving them more responsibility. And if they do it well, financially rewarding them for that. We don't turn over staff much.
Good
And
for you.
one of the things that I love, one of the stories I love to tell is that when I go in to check something that one of the dental assistants has, basically handled almost from start to finish, um, I've got some really humble people working for me. And so I'll go in and evaluate it in the patient's mouth and say, yep, you're good to go. And I'll turn to the patient and go, did she tell you she made this? And
Yeah.
they'll kind of look, what? You made this? And, hygienists will usually kind of look away and put their head down. Yeah, I did that. And the patients, they'll, oh, you got to hang on to this one, or, she needs a
Mm-hmm.
raise or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
But when they're getting that kind of like feedback from the patients and rewards, I mean, who wouldn't like that? I mean, I love it when a patient tells me, hey, nice work. I love my smile, or whatever it is.
Of
So,
course.
letting your staff handle the things that they can handle, it cuts down turnover, increases satisfaction. And if you've got buy-in, everybody's on board with making those decisions and doing those new things. And it makes a tremendous difference.
That's exceptional. I mean, I love hearing those stories, John, because all of those little nuances that aren't brought to light, you're missing an opportunity, not only to, and I don't want to say cross sell because it's a little bit of a term that's used loosely
Yeah,
these days, but you're enhancing the customization part of in which patients love that part because
yep,
they feel special. And
yeah.
that, I think, seeing that, hearing it, but feeling it, that's what really comes across. It's
I,
genuine.
I'm lucky. I've been in a lot of offices in my career, and I've met a lot of dental assistants, both when I'm just out and about or when I'm in an office. And one of the things I will sometimes ask is, how long or how often do you hear good job?
Mhm.
And as opposed to, you didn't do that right.
Yeah,
And doctors probably don't think about it because we're focused oftentimes in treatment. We're in the moment, which is where you should be.
right.
But the dental assistants don't hear a lot of positive stuff from doctors very often. And that's hard to deal with. I mean, as a doctor, I know there's certain patients that are on this schedule, and I'm just like, oh my gosh, I know they're going to be negative and they're going to complain, and there's going to be, and I don't like that because they're going to, the patients are going to give me negative feedback no matter what I do. And a
Yeah,
dental assistant doesn't want to come into the office every morning and have that environment with the person that writes their check.
yeah,
They want to feel like I like to say we're all in this together, and we are. Everybody. I mean, the front office, the clinical team, the lab, we're
yep.
all in it together. And, I don't want to do my own lab work. I don't even think I'm qualified to do my own lab work. So I need people like you. So why not treat you like you're an equal and not treat you like you're like a subcontractor to what I do. And, I'm lecturing you on, oh, it's got to be this way. And you didn't do that right. It just doesn't work. At least it doesn't work for me.
It's a great point. There's enough negativity around us today.
Yeah.
There's no
Yeah.
reason to bring it into the office and
Right.
and
Right.
create even more. And I feel when you tell me about the hard patients because they're out there, they show up, they've had bad
Mhm.
experiences, not necessarily it was caused by your office, but just
Right.
in life in general.
Yep.
And now the last thing you want to have is that crown you did on number 8 breaks and there you
Yeah.
are.
Yeah. The week before the wedding or the day before the wedding
It
or,
never
whatever.
fails.
Yeah.
Always, always. Uh, plenty of stories about working weekends and overnights for those deliveries that had to
Sure.
happen. But that's part of the game. And
You know,
now,
Go ahead. Go ahead.
But now technology helps us to actually overcome that in a much more efficient way.
Yeah. Yeah. I wanted to just, I had a thought way back when you were talking about slow is better. Slow is actually, when you take your time, it's more efficient. I wanted to tell you, I've never served in the military, but I'm a bit of a military fanboy. I read a lot of books. And one of the things that the Navy SEALs say is that slow is smooth and smooth is fast.
Exactly.
And I love that because you can apply that to so many other instances than just what they do.
Yes,
You take your time, and you don't need to rush to get a good result. I mean, usually if you rush, you don't get a good result. So giving yourself
exactly.
adequate time is really important.
Exactly. And unfortunately, in today's, we want it now. We wanted it,
Yeah,
it should have been here, 2 days ago, yesterday.
right.
It puts a lot of pressure on us. And I think understanding that, went from a 5-day deliveries down to a 2-day delivery. Um, we have to embrace technology to do some heavy lifting for us
Yeah,
to offset that. Because if we're still trying to produce things in conventional ways versus without new technology,
right.
you're not gonna stay abreast. You're just not gonna survive.
Well, and from a dental office lab, and I'm not talking about Crown and Bridge. I'm talking about the standard like pouring models and those kind of things. No dental assistant gets up in the morning and says, "Yay, alginate and powder and water and model trimmers," and um, and if you can do something, one of the things is I always tell doctors pick off the low hanging fruit. If
Hmm.
you get into 3D printing, start with things like bleaching trays.
Hmm.
Do the easy stuff, get the experience. And the other thing is using AI. There are AI systems out there now that you can import the models and then basically say design tray, and
Yeah.
boom, there's your design.
Yes, it
And
is.
I'd much rather have the dental assistant, design a bleaching tray in 5 minutes or less, and then be able to spend 10 more minutes just talking with the patient
Hmm.
or doing something else while the technology works. Because at the end of the day, the clinical treatment of dentistry, it's a relationship business, and we've got to be good at what we do, but people bond with us because that we care. It's the old thing of people don't know how much you, or don't care how much they know how much you care. And
Yes.
if you can free up the staff to then build better relationships with the patients, those patients talk about that. And that's a marketing thing all into itself. I've often said that my office, we don't really do marketing. I let the technology market for me.
Hmm.
And that works really well because it frees your people, and it frees the doctor up to get to know your patients better.
Absolutely. And they must be listening to you, John, because I'm beginning to see that more and more as I walk into practices.
Well,
Uh,
good.
their technology's up front or right as you walk in the reception area. The printers are there.
Yeah.
Sometimes if they have a small mill that they're doing some
Right.
zirconia on, those are also in clear sight. And if not right there, they're right outside the operatory. So they're not hidden
Yeah,
away in
and
some
there's
back room.
nobody in the reception room trimming models.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, we're still doing that. Absolutely. But I think, this has been a great conversation. I've loved the different paths that we've gone down, and it's also fun to kind of go back, but then flash forward. But I've really enjoyed your insight on what the new practice of today is looking for to not only achieve the customer relationship, but you also mentioned that marketing aspect of it. How do you keep the practice thriving? And
Yes.
if your patients are actually generating new clients for you, I can't think of any other better way.
No, absolutely not. And the one thing is that people tend to socialize with people like themselves. So if you have good patients, that are impressed with what you do and how you deliver things, and those people will then tell their friends, and then you will get more people just like them. And that's the name of the game. It's all about helping people. At the end of the day, everybody in this industry, from the CEO of the company all the way down to the end of the line, we all work for the patient. They're the ones that pay our salaries, and they're the ones that deserve our very best.
Absolutely.
Kim, I knew this was going to be a great conversation, and I think I might have been right on that. But
It's
thank
been
you
fun.
for spending an hour with me. I really appreciate you bringing your perspective, because the perspective of what you do and what you've done is really important. And I'm glad we got a chance for everybody to learn about it.
Me too, John. It's been a pleasure. I've enjoyed hearing your stories and hear how you connected, in the operatory with the patient and, the cross-functional team and how they perform and jump in and help. I mean, you just don't hear that very often. So kudos to you.
Well, thank you very much. I appreciate that. Everybody, this is the Technology Evangelist podcast. I am Dr. John Fluke, the Technology Evangelist. We are partnered with Medidenta Digital on this endeavor, and I'm very grateful to them for their support. Thank you for watching. We'll see you next time.